I'm Ruthie Ackerman, and I'm a 2010 IRP Fellow who went to Lebanon for 5 weeks. I was there to look at what how young people were using the internet, and one of the big campaigns that a lot of young people were doing were about how domestic workers are being exploited and abused. So these are migrant domestic workers from Nepal, Philippines, Ethiopia, Madagascar, who come to Lebanon to work in the house as house help, as maids, as nannies, and a lot of the times they are exploited and abused because their passports are taken away, they aren't paid well, they don't really have days off or guaranteed days off, they're not protected under the labor laws. So there's a lot of abuse and exploitation. And so a lot of young people have started websites. One of them is called Ethiopian Suicides, because of the fact that once a week on average a domestic worker in Lebanon ends up committing suicide because of their situation, which they feel is hopeless. There's another group called IndieAct, which has a website as well. And what IndieAct has done they've gone around to the various beach resorts around Lebanon, and there have been signs up at these beach resorts that say, no radios, no cameras, no maids. And so this group is trying to show the racist policies of these beach resorts, where all the white Lebanese are frolicking in the water, and here the maids that take care of the children aren't allowed in. And so there's been a lot of work on the ground organizing. One woman who I met who was extremely interesting and who I feel like has a special place in my heart is a woman named Amy from Madagascar. She's a woman probably in her early 50s, late 40s, who has been in Lebanon for over 12 years and worked as a domestic worker. She came over on a contract for 3 years and finished her contract, and then had the opportunity to go home, and instead decided to stay in Lebanon to work with the domestic workers that are still there as a counselor, as a community leader, as someone to help them when they're when they're having troubles. Her phone's ringing nonstop. I was sitting there with her just having coffee, and the phone was ringing off the hook, and she gets calls. Women are in the hospital, women are in detention centers. So I spent several days with Amy, just going around with her to all of her various meetings. And that's how I ended up going to Adlier, which is this detention center underneath a highway in Beirut, where I was in the visiting room with Amy, talking to some of the Malagasy ladies, and just the heat. No one could breathe. It was such an experience to see. This was only in the visiting room, so I can only imagine what it's like in the actual cells where the women are being kept. So this is Amy's daily life, to visit these detention centers, to visit the hospitals where the women go after they've been beaten. 97% of the domestic workers are women in Lebanon, and then most of them are young single women. Some of them do have children back in their countries, though, which sets up a whole nother dynamic. And then some of them end up getting married to domestic workers or others that they meet in Lebanon, and then have children in Lebanon, which causes all sorts of other problems with these children being stateless. And I went to visit Insan, which is a school for the children of domestic workers in Lebanon, and spent the day with those young children. And obviously, they're very sweet and very cute, but it's the only school where children of domestic workers can go to get an education, because they don't have any paperwork. So that sets up another whole challenge and difficult dynamic. This community leader for the domestic workers, I had gone to visit her on one of the days we were going to spend the day going around, the city, visiting various domestic workers. And when I arrived, she had just been dragged out of the church where she was waiting for me by an employer who was very upset with her for, he thought that she was hiding his domestic worker. So he dragged her out of the church and beat her in the street, right in front of a stand where there were policemen guarding another building. So the policemen, while he's beating her and calling her all these names, were watching, and then they walked over at some point in the middle of him beating her and asked for his ID. And he gave his ID, which said he was a military officer. And then they basically thought, we can't do anything, he has a higher rank than us, and allowed him to continue beating her. So I was able to go with Amy to the police station that day and watch what happens when someone who basically has almost no rights in the country goes to try to file a complaint against a military officer. It's an issue all around the world. It's an issue. Domestic workers are an issue, but this is particularly a problem in this region because of all the construction going on, because of the economy after the war has gotten better, and so there's more of a demand for domestic workers. The one country in the region that I can say has been trying to push for more change is Jordan. Actually, has just I don't know what the exact word is, but revised their labor law to include domestic workers, which was a huge step. So there are positive signs, but in the region, but for the most part, Lebanon is comparable to other countries. Poverty really is the key, is that there are, these very poor women that are very vulnerable in their own countries, and then these employment and recruitment agencies, are in their countries saying, oh, come to Lebanon, this great city, you'll make a lot of money. And what's interesting is that the contracts that these agencies have the women sign are different than the contracts that they sign when they arrive. So they actually think they're going to be making more money or working better hours, and then when they arrive, they sign contracts in Arabic that they can't understand, that, then hold them to stricter standards, and they make less money. So that's another whole issue. It's being worked on by organizations such as Human Rights Watch, but is really a problem and a challenge right now.